Good morning. Welcome and thank you for joining us for our Equity and Partnership Subcommittee. I'm going to go ahead and invite everyone to introduce themselves, including everyone in the room. And actually, Janet, if you could start.
I'm Janet Doherty Smith, and I'm a member of the Early Learning Council.
My name is Jorge Gutierrez, and I'm the Executive Director from the Lower Columbia Hispanic Council.
Good morning, I'm Donna Commodore with Education Request. Dave Porter, dual language immersion advocate, high school study abroad advocate.
I'm Jackie Salzinger with Stand for Children.
Deidre Gibson-Kearns with Multnomah County Juvenile Court.
I'm Catherine Kennedy. I'm Nancy's intern for the summer.
Whitney Groves with OEIB.
Nancy Golden, Chief Education Officer.
Matt Donegan, OEIB.
Nicole Maher, OEIB.
Peter Tromba, OEIB.
And if we could invite anyone on the phone to introduce themselves as well.
This is Helen Lizarraga with the Center for Intercultural Innovation. Good morning.
Good morning, Helen.
Rochelle Altman from Secretary of State Kate Brown's office.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Do we have anyone else?
Elizabeth Sherman, Volunteers of America.
Oh, hi, Elizabeth. Welcome. We're very glad to have you. So I'm actually going to just talk a little bit about our agenda today. We are very fortunate to have a guest here that will speak a little bit about, we introduce him, sharing an exemplary model. We're going to work on finalizing our GED policy recommendations and strategic investments and talk a little bit more about our process over the next month and a half with that. On agenda item number 4, we actually are changing this agenda item. We had hoped to have a presenter come and speak to this issue and it just didn't work out. And so we're actually inserting a different agenda item, which will be to have our discussion about the policy framework we'd like to have, focusing on better engagement for families and community partners. So we'll just have a starter conversation about that. And that is very much in line with what we're going to be doing in agenda item number 5, is really having the beginning planning conversation around one of this committee's original work plan items, which is the addressing overrepresentation of students of color in K-12 special education programs. And then the last item, Peter will actually lead us through a conversation about our role joining with the Outcomes and Investment Subcommittee about making some investment recommendations. So with that, I would love to introduce Jorge Gutierrez from the Lower Columbia Hispanic Council, who we have actually invited here to talk about his partnership with Clatsop Community College and their work together providing culturally specific GED programs to the very large and growing Latino population on our North Coast. And the reason we were so excited to invite him is that we have sort of been speaking with folks throughout the state about where community colleges and communities are partnering well, where there have been struggles, and we just felt like it would be wonderful to have someone come and share about an initiative and an effort that's really working. And in full transparency, Northwest Health Foundation has been a funder of this organization, largely because of their success and their deep engagement with all aspects of the community. So with that, I would invite you, Jorge, to share about your programs and activities.
Yeah, well, thank you, Nicole. I'll talk a little bit about the program, and if at any point anyone has questions or needs clarification, just feel free to jump in. So a little bit of the history of the program. Well, actually, first I should talk about the population that we serve. We are in Astoria, which is way out there. It's a fairly isolated community, at least in terms of just being rural. There is a quite large Hispanic population that is actually growing. Mainly a lot of this population is coming in for some of the jobs, which is a lot of it's canneries and service industry, so a lot of hotels, restaurants, that type of thing. It used to be that the population was very seasonal, so they would come in for jobs like summer and whatnot. When the jobs would end, they would go somewhere else. Well, now the population is settling and having families, so a lot of these people, they come with not very many skills, and so the cannery work is kind of their only option for the most part. So we're seeing that a lot of them don't want to just work in canneries their whole lives. So more and more recently, a lot of them have started getting interested in obtaining their GED. And up until a year ago, there really was no way for them to prepare for a GED. The only option was the volunteer literacy program at Clatsop Community College, and that's all volunteer-based. Well, the pool of volunteers that are bilingual is very, very small. So it was very difficult for a lot of these individuals to fully prepare for the GED. So I started with the organization a little over a year ago, and it just so happens that one of our board members, Eileen Purcell, who's the literacy coordinator at the college, she's, like I said, she's one of our board members. So we came up with this idea that, hey, why don't we start a program and, you know, actually have like a structure where, you know, rather than having people try to work with a volunteer who may or may not be bilingual, you know, how about we have a Spanish GED program? So we went out to a few funders, and we were lucky enough to get funded by Pacific Power and US Bank. And so last October we started the program. As Nicole mentioned, Clatsop Community College is our partner, and they have been huge and a huge help. They provided us access to classroom space at both their Astoria and their Seaside campuses. So we get pretty much access to anything. We have access to the computer lab in both locations. We have access to test materials, test tracking, which is really helpful. And so the way the class is run at the moment is we have one section in Astoria on Wednesdays, it's 6 to 8, and then the other one is in Seaside as well as 6 to 8. When we started the program last October, we were actually kind of surprised by the turnout. We initially enrolled 24 students, which for such a small community seems like quite a lot. And in the less than the year that we've been active, we've served over 30 students, and we've actually had 10 people already obtain their GEDs. Obviously, with the changes, there's going to be some new challenges, because a lot of the population that we serve, their computer skills are lacking. So we've actually added that into our GED program, where the first half hour of the class, we actually just have students go on the computers and just practice typing and practice just general basic computing skills. Let's see, make sure I cover everything. So, the way our class is a little bit different from the other GED classes is that, at least at Clatsop, the regular English GED classes, it's kind of a lab. So you come in, everybody is at a different level, everybody's kind of working on their own thing. We do it a little bit differently in the Spanish class. It's more of a regular classroom. So everybody is on the same page, and I understand people have different levels, and we have volunteers that kind of address that, so people can get ahead, or people who are a little bit behind can get extra help. But every class, we have a math lesson that everyone participates in, and it's very interactive. And this particular group seems to really enjoy that, because it makes them feel like they're going to school rather than just coming to class and just kind of working on their own work. So we have that. So we tend to focus on math. Every class there's at least a little bit of math. And then the other big focus is just reading comprehension, because that, if our theory is that if they understand what they're reading, then they're going to be able to answer pretty much any question. So there's a big focus on that, and we alternate between social studies, reading, and science. So there'll be a little bit of each in each class. We also have something a little different that we do with, I have them read books that are not necessarily something that's preparing them for the GED, but it kind of is. So we're reading Harry Potter. And so, every class they read a chapter and they come back and then we have group discussion. And I think that's really helping. I've seen some really big improvements in people who came in and they tell me all the time. They're like, I couldn't even read a page. I'd either be bored or I just didn't feel confident in my reading abilities. And I've seen some of that improve dramatically just in the past few months.
I had a question for
Yes.
you. Yes, we could interrupt. Is this taught all in Spanish?
Yes, so it's all in Spanish. And
And are some of the students not native Spanish speakers, or is that their second? Or they speak a native language, perhaps?
yeah, so it's primarily Spanish speakers. And thank you actually for asking that, because most of these students are also concurrently enrolled in English classes. So a lot of them even are pretty good at English, but their skills aren't yet at a level where they could really realistically complete their GED in English. So this is actually a really good option for them. And actually, we've had some people that have taken a combination of English and Spanish. So like one of the persons that passed the exam, they did like half the tests were in Spanish and half of them were in English. So which was really neat. So
That's good. That's an
let's see. And so some of the reasons why the GED is important to this population, like I mentioned, a lot of them are trying to get ahead financially, have other options available to them. One example that I have is this man, Ricardo Bazan. He came to us and he wanted to be a journeyman plumber. Well, you need a GED to do that, and he didn't have one. And he was one of those examples where he speaks English and he's in the process of improving his English, but again, it was not yet at that level. So he enrolled in our program, and within 2 months, he was ready, he took the test. Now he's a journeyman plumber, which is really fantastic. It's really exciting. Just speaking to the collaboration with the college, like I mentioned, it's been really fantastic, and it worked out really well. And I think we're very lucky that we happened to have the board member who was also, he's also an employee of the college, and so it just kind of all worked very organically. And so for the future, right now it's actually the slow season again, because like I mentioned, there's these work cycles in the area. So right now, we are running the program year round, but right now it's there's like 8 students, and then in the fall
because it's fishing season?
Yes.
Yeah.
The canneries are, they're working 12-hour days. So, and even so, we have people that after a long shift, they show up, even for the last half hour, which is great. I always encourage them to do that. I think that's the general overview. You guys have any questions?
What's the age range that you're serving in the program?
So it's actually very wide. So it's probably early 20s. I have a gentleman who is 64, who actually, when he was younger in Mexico, he was about a year away from becoming a doctor. Wow. And because of circumstances beyond his control, he had to go to work and couldn't finish. And so at 64, he decided, hey, it's never too late. So 22 to 64. Yeah. But the average range is probably about, I'd say, late 20s to early 30s.
Could you talk about, could you just talk about maybe some of the unique things that your organization does outside of GED that then these folks can also participate in?
Mm-hmm.
I know there's the IDA piece and the financial literacy, and then also the support around status and documentation as well. But those are coming to my mind as things that probably a community college could never offer.
Right.
So maybe if you would elaborate on that a
Yeah,
little bit.
absolutely.
Great.
Yeah, one of the things is the Mexican consulate has a mobile consulate that comes out to Astoria. Actually, they're coming in August, and that's another area where the college is very supportive, and they actually let us use the gymnasium. So we have a setup. We get a lot of people. The consulate processes any sort of documentation from passports to matricular IDs and double citizenship. And it's really helpful actually to a lot of the, even to the employers, because this is the only type of ID that a lot of these people are able to get. Oh, and I'm sorry, and some of the other programs, like Nicole mentioned, we have an IDA program, which we just started just 6 months ago. We're partnered with CASA Neighborhood Partnerships, and we offer IDAs for secondary education, as well as for people to start or improve a small business. What's the other thing? We help people with filing their income taxes. And we have a lot of people who come in for that. We actually have people that drive up from Tillamook and Newport and Lincoln City. They drive all the way up to Astoria yearly. They've been doing it for years for us to help them with their taxes. And this year we actually, I went down to Tillamook Bay Community College on Mondays to help people with their taxes from February through May. So that was very helpful to the population down there.
Hey, thanks for the report. Just a question around the community colleges. You mentioned the collaboration and the access to the gymnasium, computers.
Mm-hmm.
In addition, just access to the facilities, what kind of resource commitments is the community college providing?
When you say resource,
When it comes to the collaboration with the community college,
Mm-hmm.
what exactly are they contributing, and what more could they contribute if you really
Mm-hmm.
wanted to scale this up and grow it?
they help a lot with the testing, and actually there is a
So is that personnel? So they're contributing personnel
Yes.
hours? And
Yes,
so you've got
absolutely.
Facilities, personnel, and if
Mhm.
you could just maybe itemize a little bit more about the personnel commitments, exactly what they're contributing.
Okay. Our board member, for example, she's the literacy coordinator, so she is available for basic training. There's that, and then assessment, testing assessment. Whenever someone new comes to the program, the community college usually assesses their skills.
So they're not actually saying, well, so like the money that actually supports like the salary of yourself or whomever, you all are raising that privately. The community
Yes.
college is not necessarily
No.
saying, you know, the Latino population is 30% of our community. We're never going to reach them unless we have this program. Here's
Right.
resources to make this happen. But they are being a great partner, but not necessarily, you have to
With
then
the
go
money,
raise your
right.
own resources to run all the, okay.
Correct.
That's,
Yes.
Is that what
Is
you're,
that what you're trying to get?
I'm getting a picture of kind of a startup type of
It is.
effort, and as you kind of think about moving into the next phase and scaling it up, I guess the question I have is the 24 initial figure is very impressive. This is great. Congratulations. I'm wondering, was that kind of a little bit of, boy, there was a lot of pent up demand, and so once you get through this initial wave, it's going to drop down, or is that actually just the original initial wave, and you're going to see kind of second generation, third generation could actually grow, and if so, community college, do we need to think about additional resources? So I'm just trying to get a picture
Right.
of.
Yeah, and then actually that's sort of how we set it up. We said this is going to be the pilot program, and depending on how it evolves, then perhaps then in the future, the college can find a way to incorporate that into their general offerings. We really won't know, I think, until the fall. Like I mentioned, right now it's a busy season for a lot of the individuals. So come fall, if we get 24 again, then I think that's going to be a good representation of the future. Yes.
Have any of those who've gotten their GED applied to the college, or are they attending the college?
Yes, so a lot of the individuals that are in the program, part of the reason is they do hope to enroll in college. And so, again, most of them, their English is still not quite at that level. So there's actually a program at the college, which I'm not too familiar with, but it's called Lives in Transition. So after our program, if they complete the GED program, then they go into Lives in Transition, and then that is further preparation to enroll in classes. And we've actually, as an organization, have talked about also perhaps adding additional classes, not necessarily just GED, but just kind of general prep classes, so that they do have the skills to then go on and enroll in the college.
That's great. And just to give a little bit of context, kind of the reason we were so interested in this program is a lot of GED programs, it's either a whole program on a college and they will say, nonprofits, send me your people, and then they either come and leave after a day or don't ever actually show up. And so, and they might be very good programs, but they're very much in the college. And then you have nonprofits doing everything sort of completely on their own as well. And so I'm sure there's other models around the state, but we were very interested in this one because it's in a little bit of a different collaborative spirit, which I think we all have some opinions, might be a great practice to spread. So anyways, that just to give folks who haven't been here for some of the other conversations a little bit of context of, and thank you for actually just learning and sharing with us as you go through it, and I didn't mean to.
Oh, no, it's fine. Is there any charge for any of this for the students in the program, for the prep or the testing?
So we were going to have a nominal fee of $15, but we actually ended up having a private donor come forward, and they gave us a pretty nice donation that we were then able to cut out that fee. And actually we also have a separate fund that helps subsidize the testing fees as well.
Great. Thank you.
I just want to thank you for your leadership. This is the second time we're working together on the third grade reading proficiency, and I just have seen you as an extraordinary leader. And when we think about third grade proficiency or more GEDs, both items on achievement compacts, it's going to take extraordinary leadership in the field to make this happen. And I think you've been a real pioneer. I mean, you're very humble, but this didn't just happen on its own. You know, you had the wisdom to get a board member who's connected to the college or to leverage that. So I want you to know, from the times I've talked to you, you're really helping me think about not only your program, but how do we scale up and how do we really use you as a model about how we look at relationships. I mean, I think what's so critical is the culturally specific practices, because just the trust you have and the understanding of the people who are wanting their GEDs, and I think they'll trust you more than they would go to a campus where they might not see anyone from their culture. So that is just such a critical piece of this. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. And actually, it's, I'm glad you mentioned that, because yesterday I had a student actually come into the classroom saying that they have been to the English GED, and even though they know English, they never felt comfortable. And they were there for one class, and they were, wow, this is so different. I'm so excited to come back because of the cultural connections.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So we need to connect those much more in a deeper way towards with our community colleges. So I think of us as a group who's looking at policy, and I'm just thinking about what are the policies we would put in place. I'm also looking at the investments, because we're looking at investments, and I think we'll get at this. And so, you know, I think what's important is how in some way do we incent to make sure we've got those connections that are making your program and the students so successful.
With that, we will say thank you, and you know, and please, if you have a chance, take a look at our policy recommendations, and feel free to follow up and give us advice, and let us know what you think as someone who's on the ground every day, you know, finding success in this arena. We'd love to have your perspective.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. I actually have to go to IDA training, so.
Yeah.
All right, thanks. Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Have a
you
great rest of your
Bye-bye,
day.
thank
Thank
you.
you.
So we are excited today to share and have a discussion about our next best draft at our GED policy recommendation. And we have both the overarching policy recommendation, and then we have 3 strategic investment areas.
Yep.
One is more philosophical than resource heavy, I would say, but
Might be resource reallocation.
maybe
maybe?
more, yeah, actually all of our strategic investments, you know, we have a little bit more work to do to think about what the actual resource amount is, or if there's a way to actually just do some things differently. So today our goal is to really get to a place where we feel comfortable as a committee with these documents. We will then sort of take any feedback and incorporate any feedback or changes or suggestions we have. And then we have a long list of community groups that we actually would like to go out and actually have several groups who've already said we want to sign on and advocate and endorse this policy. And so, but we also want to make space to hear from any groups who may not love it yet, with any perspective they might have. And then I think the agenda right now is being worked on for our August OEIB board meeting. We certainly would love to have it fully adopted in August, but we also, that's a busy retreat day, so worst case scenario, we'd be looking to adopt in September and really move forward on that front. So am I missing any parts of the process and steps before we get into the actual?
No, I think it's just, for those new to it, it's parallel. So there's a policy recommendation, but we're also have another subcommittee that's working on budget. So that's why it's really been broken out in 2 forums that have separate timelines that are parallel and interacting, but we have to pay attention to both. So no, you got it quite right. And the one thing I'll note is that I just noticed that the Microsoft Word numbering kind of got a little funky in here. So if you notice things numbered a little funny, that's just an artifact of auto number, so sorry about that, but otherwise it should all be good to go.
Great. So, you know, we went over the draft at the full OEIB board meeting last month, and there was quite a bit of excitement and positive feedback. I think when we look at the OEIB board meeting where we had the full presentation about just sort of the state of GEDs and the changing test, you know, folks were kind of in learning mode at that point. GED hadn't really been front and center for us as a full board. But I think as we talked about this last time, and a lot of folks' comments really spoke to the importance of this work to really reaching 40-40-20. And so within the policy recommendation, maybe we'll just give folks a couple of minutes to look at it. And then maybe have a larger conversation and from there. So we might just, I think you just break it out.
Right. Almost fits over here.
Yeah, I mean, I think the background, I think you just do background and vision.
Yeah.
So, first
I wasn't sure I could even find it. I don't know how much, I don't know where the time is. I don't know how current that is.
Okay, I'm going to bring us back together. And I'm just going to take a moment to kind of share what we were trying to accomplish and some of our overarching goals. Certainly recognizing that 1 out of every 4 Oregonian students is not completing a high school diploma is very important to this work, and recognizing that at this time this is the alternative credential that we recognize in the state and that OEIB recognizes in the 5-year cohort rate. Sort of a recognition that all parts of the 40-40-20 will not be able to be completed unless GED is built in sort of a stronger way that actually meets the needs of students better. We are trying to do less referencing to the term pipeline and change our language to creating a shoreline of opportunities. The pipeline metaphor is actually quite troubling because there's so many ways to get out of a pipeline and no real way to get back into the pipe in many aspects, whereas a shoreline really illustrates many different ways for students to be successful and symbolizes us adjusting ourselves to actually meet the needs of the student as opposed to them adjusting to meet our needs. So essentially, I think the other thing I might add is that we tried to be very clear that while the GED is important, we want it to be relevant and valued and to be a really important piece of our larger goal, which is career and college ready as well. So hopefully you'll see that language embedded. We chose to include a section on beliefs because we feel like there are many biases and stereotypes and misperceptions out there about the GED, and as the highest governing board for the state, it's our role to really say what our beliefs are and to be transparent about that and to align systems around that. We have made 3 strategic recommendations. Our first overall recommendation is really to look at how we're currently governing and our systems are aligned at this point. We've actually done quite a significant amount of research and found that it's very segmented, and even when we began this work there was not even a draft list of all the programs that existed in the state. There's now a draft list. We will not claim it's perfect, but even how those systems and services are supported and what the standards and how they actually work collectively towards our 40-40-20 goal is not clear. So we would like to align that and really provide stronger, better leadership. Not we meaning OEIB, but we want to put that out there as an expectation for our students in the state that they have that leadership. We have a second recommendation around incentivizing and funding more partnerships between community colleges and nonprofits, or even supporting successful models that really can support GEDs but also provide some of the other wraparound services that we have seen in all of the research really predict success of completing a GED. So just getting testing support is it's positive, but what you really actually need is the testing support and then all of the other wonderful life supports that can actually result in a completed GED and then the transition onto a career or college. And then our third recommendation is very simple, which is something that we've moved forward at OEIB and made progress around, which is paying for some of the testing for AP classes in high school. We're working towards that. Why would we not do that for at-risk or low-income students in our state to receive their GED as well, particularly as the tests have become quite cost prohibitive. So that would be our third investment, and that we felt like could be something that there's a variety of ways that could be a support to a community college or a nonprofit and so on and so forth. The other part that I failed to mention is that Kate Brown and her team did a phenomenal job making a series of recommendations around ways that the GED and the supports that exist should be improved, as did the City Club of Oregon, and we looked at all of those recommendations and kind of combined them, and at a previous meeting the committee sort of chose to adopt their great work. So we won't pretend that we came up with all of those ourselves, but both of those organizations spent a phenomenal amount of time and resources doing the research, and we're poised and ready to help move their recommendations forward, if you will. So I think at this point we'd love feedback on improvements and suggestions. I sort of shared one with Peter, which is just in the beginning, what we're calling a vision is sort of 60% background information and 40% vision, and so I would just suggest we separate it out and call the background and the vision. So I don't think that doesn't substantially change any of the content. It's more of an organizational suggestion, but I'd love other types of feedback.
Two things I can think about. One is, how do we really make sure that, in a sense, it's almost like we're giving possibly some resource, or there's the programs at the community college and it feels separate with the programs that, because they're separate recommendations, the programs that are community-based, culturally specific community-based. And to me, the power is, how do we incent that they really work together, and that we make sure whatever money funnels, if it just doesn't create the same system, because strategic investments are supposed to be transformational. And to me, it means creating more programs like we just talked about, and probably even going deeper in that. And then the second piece, and I think this is just about the important work of OEIB, which is how do you connect all these various things going on. My assumption is many of these people who get their GEDs will want to go on and get licenses or certificates or AAOT transfer degrees. And so to me, there's a deep connection with this work and the work of looking at developmental education. We know people are doing that, and community colleges are working really hard on that. But I don't know if there's a way to create a deeper connection between those two, because you don't want to get your GED and then end up in a developmental ed program, which you can never get out of.
Yeah,
so.
That's a great. And I think on the incentivizing partnerships, I think that's our spirit, but I don't think we've said it as clear as we can yet.
My comment was somewhat similar in that I know that the HEC has done some work recently around sort of clarifying the 40-40-20 as it relates to the adult population versus the youth population, and I thought that work could maybe be referenced somewhat.
Okay.
In addition, you talk about opportunity youth, and I think people are starting to understand, but it's not defined in here, and I just think it still is something that really needs definition for people to
Opportunities on that definitional one about
I
having
think on
that.
page 2,
Oh.
we may have defined it,
Got it.
but look at it and tell us.
You
We
mean
just made our own
opportunity youth?
definition of.
I just think it's one that still catches people's eye.
Yeah. And we sort of,
We changed it, yeah.
yeah, we kind of just tried to clarify. We have a lot of students who actually have never gone to high school. They dropped out of school in 6th or 7th or 8th grade, and so really saying we want to be intentional about programs that reach those students who did not complete high school, and then just sort of we have this huge group of sort of 16 to 25-year-olds who are
Right.
disconnected from school and work. So Does that sound like the right?
I think so. I mean, having that age, because part of the work that the HEC has done is to, as much as we don't want to ignore the adult workforce population,
Yeah.
there is a sense that with limited resources, we have to make some choices and priorities around where we're going to focus. And I think here you don't have any link to that age focus in
Right.
terms of, are we talking about 64-year-olds or are we talking about
Yeah.
24-year-olds?
I mean, I don't think when we looked at kind of where resources were going and what was happening, it was clear that there was actually a lot more resources going to like work systems and the adult systems to
Right.
support GEDs, which was more why we leaned this way. And I don't know
Yeah.
how effective it is with the adult systems, but there's certainly more dollars going directly to community colleges to do that work than there are. The resources for younger populations primarily will be contracted through school districts and different things like that, but it's just really dependent on the school district, and it's more rare than not, so
I think it's the right place to focus and that you could even just be
more clear.
So it's stronger if we said that, because the
I think so.
federal definition of opportunity youth and grant applications and things is very specific. And we've broadened that, as Nicole mentioned, to include students who've never attended high school and things. But the feds define that ending at 25. I think it's 14 to 25. Iris, if you're out there anywhere, correct me, but I believe that's the brackets around the ages.
I actually don't think that is a bad way to go. I mean, if we have, we do have quite a few students who do drop out in middle school, but I don't think that we would be like, here, let me send you to GED program.
Right.
We would be like, let's go back to middle school, and I would hope that would be our strategy. So, Matt, do you have any feedback or thoughts for us?
Let me get back to you on that.
Okay, great. I think the other thing, Peter, which is like a super unhelpful suggestion, is that it's still super long. So I wonder if there's some ways that we could say things shorter, but
Take the vowels out. I can work on that.
yeah.
I was going to say the adjectives.
Yeah. Each revision gets better and tighter, so we can
Yeah,
make it.
no, you've done a great job taking us from where we were to where we are now. I really appreciate it. Okay, and so we are certainly going to be excited to hear public testimony at the end of this meeting to get additional feedback. And then we will be really taking this around to organizations throughout the state to get their feedback as well and inviting them to support. But we do, I'm not sure, Nancy, if you're able to comment on the availability of time on the August agenda, or if you think September is more realistic.
I think September's more realistic.
Okay.
We will be taking things through outcomes and investment, which is just scheduled in there. And so they'll be looking at all of them and giving feedback and questions.
So-
Investment.
We'll be with
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're prepared and ready to bring some of the investment
Yeah,
on the
so it'll
August
be-
6th. But, it's one of those things where we will not have officially passed our policy until September, but I don't.
I think that's fine.
Oh, that's okay.
The same thing is happening with best practices, just
Yeah.
because the budget was pressing, so.
Okay,
And this is a new process, so we're still,
Yep.
we realize, it's going to need to be a little flexible as we all learn how to do it, so.
okay, perfect. So, with that, then I think I'll move us on to any feedback about the actual outcomes and investment document.
Can I add one just on the document? I did have an opportunity to meet with Community College and Workforce Development leadership after our last meeting regarding this alignment. I have not yet been able to get a meeting with the Oregon Department of Education on the same topic. But at CCWD, that's Community College and Workforce Development, there's a great deal of interest in having this move forward. The idea of this siloed approach that we currently have is something that they would like to improve on. Having a discussion about staffing levels at the state, how community colleges do the work, how they scholarship things differently, all of that is a rich area of alignment. And there's no specific recommendation here yet, but in a general sense, they're very, very supportive of us moving forward there.
Great, that's wonderful news.
So that brings up a good point, maybe just the issue around developmental ed, because I know they're working on it. Maybe there's a section where or a recommendation about alignment, to continue to work on these fundamental areas to get greater of alignment.
Within the policy statement?
I think so, because that creates the bridge.
Okay, that's a great, that's a part that it's sort of been weighing on me, but I haven't been quite sure how to,
Make the connection.
or how do you address it?
Yeah.
And all, I don't think we want to spend a lot of time wordsmithing this document.
No.
It's a funky document, so, like formatting suggestions are not welcome because we're not the boss of the format. So it's more of, is the spirit and the specifics right?
So it says 8 pages, and this is 11. Will you do a smaller font or?
Sure.
Is that part of the,
Yeah, I don't know.
I hate you to
Whitney.
get thrown out.
Yeah,
Oh, it's okay.
it goes over 8
We'll let
pages.
it.
I hadn't noticed that stopped other groups from exceeding 8 pages,
Oh.
but
Well, that's fine.
I bet Whitney would throw us out.
I'm throwing
yeah, I
things
can.
out.
Some of the statistics and things could be significantly changed, a little pie graph or something to make it shorter.
Just,
No, that's helpful.
you know how that happens on some grants.
Yes.
Get out.
Yeah, they just stop reading after page 8.
Can I ask a question about the first strategy, which appears to be the alignment strategy?
Yes.
This doesn't feel like a budget or an investment request, and so it seems to me that you might want to either put it as, I think there's a question somewhere in this funky template that asks about how you're going to recommend repurposing resource, and to me this is about repurposing, and that if there's an actual dollar investment, the outcomes and investments will kind of want to see that up front instead of this alignment piece, I think.
Yeah.
It's also into the nuts and bolts of what the subcommittee won't even get into, which is how you put a budget together, so
I think so. I totally agree with all of that, and I think this is a spot for maybe repurposing or maybe elevating. We just felt like none of our recommendations would be relevant or matter or have any positive impact on Oregon students if the alignment piece didn't happen. And so originally when we wrote it, we sort of had 1 and 2 and it wasn't alignment, the alignment wasn't there. And you could see people reading it and the way they would respond was like, well, that's not gonna work if we still have the same discombobulated system we have now. So that was kind of the strategy to address that. I think that if there was a budget need, I don't think to help solve that or improve alignment, we would consider it. We're just not sure, so.
And the feedback I've gotten from agencies is it actually might take a short-term investment to bring this alignment together and to achieve the goal of coming to all of Oregon with one voice about the GED. And that would then be in the system once we determine where it's going to live in state government. It'd be there forever. But the people who are currently working, like the folks at CCWD, are working as fast as they can. So the question then is, well, who convenes the work group? Who kind of moves things forward? If the OEIB is a policy group, who does that transitional work to get it aligned? And so that's some of the feedback I got. There was actually a policy option package for Community College Workforce Development that included some of this exact work, and they pulled it with the expectation that we might be asking for something. So, and that's not maybe reflected well enough in here because others say, well, there's plenty of money, you just need to use it differently.
Well,
So-
I think maybe just clarity then around some sense of the idea is that it would be sufficient staffing to support a task force, some funding around this public awareness piece or whatever a few ideas
Okay,
are.
that's excellent.
It's more granular than
Yeah,
we need, but I think this one is a little bit odd because,
like alignment.
yeah.
So, yeah, no, I think that's helpful. Okay. So, any other comments before we move on? I'm taking that as a no. Okay, so moving on to our next two agenda items, and just to invite people to recall that actually agenda item 4 is changing. So we actually want to take about maybe 10 minutes to just have a discussion about one of the charges of this committee. Our title is Equity and Partnership Subcommittee. We had really wanted to create kind of a policy or a statement that really spoke to our state's values and perspective on partnering with families and with community, and how we do both those partnerships and that type of engagement in all of our work through early childhood and all the way into higher ed as well. So certainly we when we think about partnering with the community and families, folks tend to have more of an early childhood and K through 12 perspective, but we are a K through 20 system, so we do need to think about that. And I think that the important questions we need to answer today are really, one, what is our best role? What are other people doing? We don't want to sort of, step in other people's work or duplicate something that may not be needed. And we also don't have a clear statement or perspective or value piece on this as a state yet. So once we sort of have a sense of what our best role is, what does that look like? Is that a policy statement? Is that a value statement? Where is OEIB's best role? And then 3, if we want to start having kind of a conversation about what some of those values and beliefs that this committee feels would be a great starting point for Peter and his team and I to kind of start drafting that. So with that said, I might invite Nancy, if you have perspective on if anyone else is working on this, or what else is out there in the many fields and systems we interface with.
Now you're talking about in relationship to everything happening on the committee, or just the GED right now?
As it pertains to a policy around community engagement, partnership, and family engagement.
On everything.
On all the things that we do.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the research we've done is we don't have a statement or any set of, there's...
No, I would see that as the responsibility of this committee. Do other people as we look at our early reading, 3rd grade proficiency, do we talk about the importance of parent engagement? So it's integrated throughout all the others, but really to clearly define how important that is to us and how it should be represented as we do our other work. We don't have that. So that would be a great job for this committee.
So do you think that looks like a policy statement, a values and belief statement? Like, what do you think is the most useful tool that, like with the equity lens, not everybody knows how to use it or what to do with it, but they're sort of like, this is our state's perspective on equity, and then folks aspire to sort of implement or get there as it pertains to their work. Do we want something like that around?
Well, it'd be good to see what other people feel, but I do think you always start with a value and beliefs. I think, to me, the steps would be to start there and then see what that is and say, based on that, in order to get these values and beliefs to really happen in the state, or as we look at the whole continuum from birth through college and career, do we see these reflected? Then the next question would be, how's the best way to get them reflected? It could be a policy, it could be, investment's supposed to be transformational, so it's just setting it up. You know what I'm saying? It could be that way. So I think it needs to be a 2-step process.
Right. So we've got a values, belief, policy, and then
see what else we would, if anything, we need to put in place. Or if you just then hold that as, like the equity lens, you'll see, and I know we're trying to get this investment form simpler, that it's first time kind of clumsy, but it does make you really look at things from an equity lens. So it's that kind of thing you might want to get done. But in a sense, the board is directing OEIB to make sure when they're doing their work. this is a piece of it. So it could be directing agencies.
Right, I mean, I would imagine it is similar to equity, the equity lens in that everything we do really should have, you know, a community aspect. I mean, if you think about our land-grant universities, there is a community aspect to that. You think anything we're doing in K through 12, there is a community engagement, family engagement piece, but that's, many of those systems deeply struggle with that. But it should be something that there's an expectation throughout everything we do, and you may want to do some additional investments to do some transformational work to help people get there.
Yeah, I think the other important thing is that the people on the committee are reflective of the people in the community. So, you know, our Equity Reading Summit began because we had people that didn't reflect the faces of the children making decisions about children. When we brought people together who also represented the cultures, I think what we've come up is so much deeper because of it, because they have another perspective that's really critical. So
that sounds like a value we would want to include.
And the last thing I would say about that, which is really a value, it's, you know, we have the people's data and we're seeing, you know, groups line up. Some of the groups aren't achieving as well, and primarily those are communities of color. And then we see everybody's improving, not as fast as I would like, but people are improving. But what we have to see is a closing of that opportunity gap. And so what that means, we certainly need to provide resources for all, but we've got to be very strategic and very focused on the groups we need to close the opportunity gap. So to me, that would be part of parent engagement too.
So what I hear you saying is, you know, where we're struggling and not demonstrating the most success at serving some populations, we would probably need to invest or intentionally engage those populations better, because whatever we're doing is not working, and the very populations that we're not being successful at serving probably have some solutions or some answers in how we could change what we're doing to improve. Is that sort of the,
Yes, absolutely. And the only last thing I'll say then, okay, the people, chances, so what I think it also means, and I think there's other people working on this, but we need to connect with it, we have to help develop the next new leaders to reflect our communities too. And I think this is a perfect example of an extraordinary leader who's just beginning to show his talents.
yeah. Well, I think we need to develop the next new leaders. We also need to help coach and bring along our current educational leaders who sometimes think they're doing parent engagement, but may not be, based on what the community views as parent or family engagement. So, all right, that's great. Janet, do you have anything you want to?
I would just say, my experience, Head Start has an excellent record of family and community engagement, and I don't know what we can glean from that for older students, but it seemed to me there's having meaningful activities and being able to see that your efforts change things in Head Start. So that parents are on policy council, they vote and decide things that are equivalent to what the executive board does. They have the same voice. And it has been interesting to see people start out very timid and quiet and then finding out that, yes, I can say something. And I mean, I'm on a Head Start board, and policy council parents will come and they start going through the budget things, and how come you've got that notebook there that was $500 or $1,000? You could get a notebook for $450 in it, and then just seeing people are respectful of that and do explain why they made those purchases and things, and then you do see people move into more community leadership because of that experience.
Could you just, maybe be helpful, would you mind just kind of synthesizing kind of just the umbrella question here and then what the themes are?
Sure, yeah, we're definitely jumping around to all three of the topics. So, I mean, I think the umbrella goal is to really set a, I'll call it a policy statement that, you know, the state of Oregon really values deep partnerships with families and communities. And I think there's probably a deeper belief statement that underlies that if you really want to change outcomes, what we historically have done is sort of said, well, education and outcomes, those are all the responsibility of the school, but what you actually see is where you get great change in outcomes and really improved outcomes is when the community and families and schools really work much more collaboratively together. So I think our desire is to really set a different tone and belief statement around that. And so I think where we're at now in this conversation is folks are kind of throwing out beliefs or values that they would have, that they desire and reflected in that document. So if you have any of those, we'd love it. And if you have an issue with any of the assumptions we're making and the need for that statement, love to hear that too.
No, I think the statement makes sense, and it sounds like what we're just trying to do is make it very explicit that this is how things are best accomplished. I think that makes sense.
So, you know, I think this is similar to what Janet was saying, but, and it would end up with a brief statement, but when I was superintendent, I immediately got on the CCO because I knew the connection between health for the students and how that was going to be important. And so the community care organizations also have an advisory committee, and the advisory committee needs to be made up of 51% consumers, so people who get Medicaid. And then the other 49% were non-consumers. So I was a non-consumer on that group, but I just remember one day, and there was this woman who, she's in a wheelchair, and she has to do this bandaging of her legs on a daily basis. And she said right now the way the system is, they won't just pay her to get the bandages, she knows how to do it, but every time she has to go to a doctor, which is tough when you're in a wheelchair, she has to pay huge amount of money so that they can bandage it. And I think when we have parents or consumers, you know, CCOs are all about finding those things in the system that don't work, but I'll tell you who can tell you about the stuff in the system that don't work. It's the consumer. So, you know, I think,
Right.
and that could be the parent, but I think we have to structure it so that they understand that's part of their role, you know.
Right.
OEIB is about transforming systems, and we not only need to put parents on, we need to help train them so that they don't feel like if I'm saying that, I'm being perceived as negative, that your job is to point out the places in the system that aren't allowing us to get to the outcomes.
Hi, Ramon, welcome.
Thank you. Sorry for being late. We literally just got off the plane from the Dominican Republic. So we got delayed in Los Angeles. So we were supposed to get here at 8:30 and we got here later.
Well, thanks for joining us after a long flight.
Yes.
We're talking about some of the values and perspectives we would like to have in our the policy and belief statement we're creating around the state of Oregon having kind of true parent, family, and community engagement as kind of a standard of how we do business and education.
Good. I want to introduce a guest I brought from the Dominican Republic, Dr. Anselmo Suriel. He's going to be with us for a week, and I'm taking him around to meet with different parent groups. And soon he met with yesterday in Miami with a group of students. So
welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Mi nombre es Anselmo Suriel, San Ramírez, República. Nombre de la Confederación Nacional Campesina como FENACA.
So this is Anselmo Suriel from the Confederation of Farm Workers. So he's glad to be here. Thank you.
Good to have you. So I think we have, do you have enough information to get started here?
I do. One thing I'll just note, there's an assumption that we made that I think it'd be great to do some research on, which is the idea that when we engage with community groups, we get higher achievement, which I think all of us believe and have probably seen. But that's one of the things we hope to present. There's actually now a growing body of research to say that's not isolated. It's not just one place or another. It's when you empower, you actually get results. And when you bring folks in, you get you close gaps, like you were saying, Nancy. So that's the one thing, is to call for that research.
So the factors that really lead to the
Right.
Yeah.
When they really look at it, there's reasons it happens. So.
In the world of health, it's quite, there's a mountain of research, and what it shows is that you can spend a mountain of money. You can have the most well-researched strategies that have been duplicated over and over and over again, but if you don't have community buy-in and if you don't have the community as part of leadership, it will not work at all. And you can do things that have very little resources and actually have never been researched, and when they have amazing community buy-in and the community shares in the leadership, you actually get phenomenal outcomes. And so I can't imagine it would be too different in education,
Right.
but I can help on that.
No, it actually throws into question the whole topic of best practices in the education world. Because when you look underneath all the studies, did they get certain people involved or not? So,
yeah.
Thank you. That's really helpful to start out.
Well, I just, part of OEIB was to have a small, nimble policy and research group, and obviously Peter is the leader of that, but we now are staffed up, so
That's
we
great.
have a team of 4 plus 2 data people. So now when things like this come up, know that we're going to be able to really synthesize research, come up with a one-sheeter that really points it out in a way to really inform these committees. So I'm thrilled we're at that point.
Great. Good. Well, so I think our next topic, which we will follow very similar format to the discussion we just had, which is our work around the overrepresentation of children of color in special education. And kind of, I think the first question will be, what are other people doing and where is there other work being done? What is our best use of OEIB? And then what are some of the values and beliefs that we would like to see included? And just for some background information on that, we did have a fairly lengthy presentation 3 meetings ago. I think you were there with us for a moment, where we had the Department of Education folks present on kind of all of the things that are happening from their perspective on special ed and kind of current processes and procedures. Janet did a nice job summarizing the sort of state of the data when we were first getting here this morning. I think the trends that we see statewide as it pertains to data is that when there are diagnoses of things such as emotional disorders, behavior disorders, and slight delays, we see astronomical overrepresentation of children of color. So really where there's fuzzy areas where it's all pertaining to a lot of judgment, individual judgment, you see huge, unbelievable racial disparities. Where there tends to be much more diagnosis-based physical or mental disorders, you see much smaller disparities because it's much more based on a medical or diagnosis. So that's a great reminder for all of us to recognize. I will share that once we did have that presentation by the State Department of Ed, we actually had several of our board members who are actually, the great thing is many of our folks are actually really involved in this work in their local districts or have great experience. And actually several of our audience members, we did hear a lot of comments that the way that special ed was described as far as processes and what happens sounded like a totally different system than what community members had actually personally experienced or board members had personally experienced. And I will share that I worked for 11 and a half years in the Portland metro area with 6 different school districts, and I was like, I think I lived in a different state than where that presentation was given from. So I think that there is a little bit of a disconnect that we probably need to think about, because the actual policies and the infrastructure that exists to support parents and families' rights they're written, they're there, but then what families actually experience in the day-to-day school seems to be very, very different. And so I think that's something that we will have to grapple with a little bit as a committee. So I would actually invite you, Nancy, to maybe help us think through what our best role is on this, like if I think because we don't necessarily want to take on all special ed, we really want to take on overrepresentation and racial bias that exists within our system. So where do you think we should start and what our best role is on that?
Yeah, so, and I'd be interested in what other people have to say too, but one thing I think is, I think with something like this, we really do need to take time to get the experience of the parent of the children and the educators in the system. So sometimes I think starting with some focus groups, very strategic focus groups where we're really asking about people's experience, because what I see is people who have developed the experience have best of intentions and think it's doing what it needs to do, but from the parent perspective, it's very different. And I'll just give you an example alone. In OEIB, if you use an acronym, you get charged 5 cents. We've all agreed to this. The acronyms you experience in an IEP meeting are just unbelievable. And I was a director of special ed, and I had a child who had an IEP, and even for me, it was sometimes difficult. And it's a school psychologist, and it's the regular teacher, and oftentimes it's the physical therapist and the occupational therapist and the speech parent, and they all have, and it's not very integrated. So I've been a special educator. I know how these folks love kids, but they're inside the system. So we've really got to get to the people outside, and we really have to identify what's working, because things do work, and what's not working. I think at the same time we have to be identifying, again, the research can do this, what are the best practices.
So I love your idea of a focus group representing families. I think it would be wonderful to have maybe 3 focus groups. So one being family members, another being kind of folks in special ed who are maybe getting some, if there's some districts who have leaders who are getting good outcomes with communities of color, let's learn from them. And I know that's a biased focus group, but that's the kind of information we would want to hear. And then the last one I would think might be really helpful is we actually have a variety of community-based organizations who work with populations from communities of color who end up being kind of on the advocacy front lines, that end up going in and supporting the parents and the children, and actually have, I know Latino Network has a whole position that does that for students throughout multiple districts, and we recently did a disability RFP and invited that person to sit on our committee to sort of help us make sure we were making the right decisions. But that person actually has a perspective of what is happening to hundreds of Latino families. Is this is this a bad thing that happened with one kid, or is this a system-wide issue that's happening with hundreds of kids? And if we could have a focus group that gave us that insight to communities of color across the state, that might be a third group. I'm probably missing some. I don't know. I don't want to make like a giant task of focus groups, but.
Well, what's interesting, it can get confusing, is sometimes when you're doing research or finding best practice, doing focus groups are part of that. But I think do focus groups. At the same time, we need to really be finding out what's with those groups, with the groups who are successful, but also at a national level, what's really happening to impact it.
Yeah, I also agree with your comment about forming the focus groups, because I think that what will surface those very issues that I think we need to address. And so I think I like involving the parents and special ed folks and advocates. I would say that to me it would be like we need to kind of like identify what's the main objective here. Is it solely just to surface what's out there, or do we have? What's our at the end of the day, what's our goal?
Yeah.
And so we're clear with people. So I don't want to leave expectations in the community that this is a special group or this is a special group working on issues, and that somehow we're going to address all the needs in the community. but rather if our goal is clearly just to surface what the issues are in the community, that we're clear about that and we let those folks know that this is, we're tackling a huge problem and this is where we start. So that, and I think it's really important to let especially all three folks who are being represented at the table in this process, that we're all clear about that. And that there's that there's a sense of confidentiality and that we really want to tackle this issue. So we really want certain issues that are out there. We want to be able to identify that and address them. And this is sort of like the first step to do that.
So I think a couple of things, I completely agree with that. I mean, I think that we would probably approach it and say, we're doing this because OEIB would like to adopt a policy framework that really addresses the overrepresentation. But before we do that, we want to really understand what's happening. But we also understand that a policy framework is not going to magically fix everything.
Oh, yeah.
We would also have to start with the policy framework, hopefully over time make transformational investments that then would improve it.
Exactly.
But we're just trying to maybe start with listening. And then the other piece that I would share, that I don't know if a focus group is the right strategy, but the other, this may be more of a data question, but I haven't seen the updated data for probably 2 years, but when we looked at the data for early intervention and who was actually being referred and seeing early intervention services, and throughout the state it's different. Sometimes ESDs run it, sometimes school districts run it. It's pretty shocking to actually see how few children of color actually ever get sent for early intervention, and then when you actually look at who gets referred to early intervention, they almost never go. Then you can actually peel it a little bit further and see that the early intervention staff and systems are not usually set up in a way that's very reflective of the population, so you kind of are like, oh, it makes sense why they might not go. And then you essentially see that same population of kids show up in kindergarten and first grade and suddenly get sent straight into IEPs. So I don't know that there's a focus group question there, but I think that is probably a really important beginning piece of where our challenges are beginning. And
So getting the data for that really.
it may have improved, but I don't know why it wouldn't have recently improved. So, and there's probably, like anything else, parts of the state that are doing it better than others. So.
And I just want to note on that score, that's a real obvious place at OEIB. That's a transition from one system to another that we need to help manage. So, okay.
Right.
Nicole, I just got a quick question. So when you look at the total special education population in Oregon relative to other states, how do we stack up?
Sure. I mean, Nancy may have better information than me. I'm kind of parroting what I've learned from Rob. So, and I don't know how we have. What I know is that we have great variance. So you have some districts who are over 20% special ed, and you have some districts who really have ratios that match what the national data shows. The other thing that's important to note is that when you look at all of the research, there's actually no difference in disability between communities of color and the white population, with the exception sometimes of immigrant communities who come from war-torn countries. There may be a higher rate of physical disability or other types of disability. And so
what I'm trying to get my head around is, are we, again, we look at just the total population, the percentage that are within a special education program, how does that compare? I mean, are we, when you benchmark that, and then within that, the overrepresentation piece, and again, how do we compare to other states, how do you benchmark? And then the third piece is how much of this is incentive driven, where there are funding incentives around special education. And the final one is that what are the real implications of, obviously, if there's overrepresentation, that you use the term bias, I mean, that's very troubling. And just a very clear statement of what the implications of this are to students, communities, budget, just get a sense of magnitude of what the problems is.
That's great. I'll let Nancy answer the question parts of that.
Yeah, so I think, we can get you the exact.
Excuse me on the
figure.
phone, could you just mute? We're hearing a bunch of static, I'm sorry. If you're on the phone, if you could mute, that would be helpful. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt, Nancy.
That's okay. So we can get you the exact number, but I think what is really, what we know, and I'll just use the district I was superintendent in, we reduced how many kids were in special ed by 25% when we started, I don't have the exact figure, but that's about that when we moved to response to intervention. The old way was like, the child doesn't seem to be achieving, you refer them to a school psychologist who has a heavy workload, can't get to it for 3 months. Response to intervention is, on Monday, if you identify the problem, on Tuesday you have an intervention, and you have to change your systems to do that. So I think the answer to your question, I see us really figuring out, what do we hear from our focus groups, what's best practice, what's the transformation in the system we think we need to do, and that would get recommended as an investment, whether it's a policy investment or a financial investment. But the important thing about this is we also want to identify those systems changes, because that's what we're most about. And so, again, we would need to ask Rob, but right now we have X amount of people doing RTI. I think it's somewhere between 1/4 and 1/2 of the district. So that system does work. The other thing that is going to begin to work is if we really meet that 3rd grade proficiency and kids come to kindergarten ready to learn. So I think the other important thing about this is we need to look at this in light of the other transformational changes we're making. Not to say, still, a child coming in needs help. So you can't go, well, if the birth kids by kindergarten, they're going to be right on track. We still have to worry about the kids. So somehow in this, we have to figure out what are the systems that's going to create the reduction, and also what are the strategic investments or transformations we've put in place so that we don't talk about it in isolation. So the people in special ed have to be totally committed to early literacy starting at birth. The K-12 people have to be committed to singing to their kids, talking to their kids, more words. We read the study by Casey. Some kids at age 3 hear 30 million more words than other kids. And that is a pre-literacy skill. That builds your vocabulary. So I think we have to do that. So we can get you the number of special ed.
I think what I'm getting at is much more strategic. The data are very useful, but I think just much more strategic is what I heard from Nicole was perhaps a big misdiagnosis, and there also seems to be something that's very confounding here, which is how much of this is truly disorder driven and so forth.
Or poor systems.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And
versus perhaps early learning intervention and just learning readiness that's being perhaps diagnosed as special ed.
All the time.
So it seems it seems definitions matter and help would be helpful, and in terms of your early intervention comments, Nancy, those were great. Those do seem like that shrinks the total pie, as opposed to really much more the racial disparity question that I would imagine still persists.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no question that there is racial disparity and overrepresentation of children of color being identified based on cultural differences, misperceptions, stereotypes. I mean, and it's racial and gender. Boys are also incredibly over-identified because a whole set of differences between the way boys and girls learn and interact in the classroom. And so I think part of that is my opinion, but I do think the data does support it.
Well, we have to do the focus groups and have to do the research that really calls that out, because I believe it's there, and then once we see it, it helps us think about the solution. But I know in special ed, it really breaks my heart, but they used to think kids with cerebral palsy were intellectually limited when it's just they couldn't get the words out of their mouth. Well, sometimes when a child doesn't speak English, they're really bright, but if they're not given a test that really test their ability. I mean, if you gave me a test in Spanish,
We have a GED test for you, right?
Yeah.
yes.
That's right,
I mean,
yeah.
I'm not gonna achieve well in it. And
Yeah.
so sometimes those things like language, people interpret not having a language as not having a certain skill set. And that's just one, have you seen that? That's
Yeah, I
just
did.
one.
I actually, I was a high school counselor for 3 years at Woodburn High School. And what I think what Nicole says is true. What I found was that there was actually some cultural barriers that existed, including language. But the cultural barriers were the things that I recognized that were surfacing more than the others. And that is that culturally, you need to have some competent people that understand the culture. There's this one classic case of a family. The guy was a 9th grader. Up to the 9th grade, he had perfect grades. He had good grades. And then there's a family separation, and the kid goes berserk and assumes the role of the father in the household, which is a cultural thing in the Latino culture. And then he's starting to get physical with his siblings, talking back to his mom, doesn't go to school because he's assuming the role of the father who's no longer there. So his instructors think that he has they don't know what to do. And so they put him on a special program when really what he needed was some case management from outside sources. And then, exactly.
So that's a perfect
And that's a really good example. And I intervened in that and actually found him. I actually took him out of school and put him in the GED program at the University of Oregon, and he graduated, and and the problem got corrected. But that's what it's going to take, is that we need systems. It was a systems problem that was identified, but actually. My question is, how many other kids fell through the cracks? So this is something I think, to me, it's really important when we do the focus group that we not only have in mind what we're trying to reach, and I like that about we're trying to identify what it's going to take to change the system and what resources that we need to do that. And I noticed that the other thing was that this was not only happening with Latino kids, this was happening with a lot of other kids. So started to think about the need for preparation, like how do we get our teachers? Because I worked with the best teachers in Oregon, and I agree with you. They were really motivated to help students, but they didn't have the resources. So I agree with the whole approach, and I think that we gotta have the research, and we gotta understand what's out there to make change. And I do want to recognize that we're on it's a pretty steep climb. We have a big task ahead of us. So I think we need to go one step at a time and build from there incrementally. So we start identifying what the problems are. We start working at solutions, best practices, and then, we got to experiment. I mean, because I think the more that we're flexible, and we got to develop a really strong team of people that are invested in change. And I think if we do that, we're in the right direction.
That's great. No, I really agree and appreciate and support that. I mean, I think when we think about the climb, my children go to school in Portland Public Schools. It's the largest Native school district and has the largest number of Native kids in the state by a big margin. 8 out of every 100 white students in PPS is on an IEP. 1 out of every 4 Native children is on an IEP. And there's thousands of kids in the Native community in PBS. So we have, and then you look at the talented and gifted percentages, and we have 1 child for a percentage of 0 in the Native community. So, I mean, we have a climb, but it's, but I think, I know the data on one community. It's probably a similar story for other communities, and it's a real urgent issue, because when you look at the overall outcomes for kids who are on IEPs statewide, that's our population who is really struggling the most overall, and then we have this overrepresentation issue. So I think this is a really important equity issue, but it's a really important issue to just the overall success of our state.
I appreciate what you were saying, Nancy, about systems. Having worked in special education a good portion of my life, I do know, and I don't have this fact-based, it's experiential, that people would tend to say, well, if we make them eligible, at least they'll get something.
Yeah.
Like, we can be nicer to them than other people, and that is wrong. But it is a reality that I would find people making children eligible
Yep.
in early intervention when they were kind of on the cusp, but there was something else, but there were no other resources available to them if we didn't pick them up. And the thought that if we worked really hard, they would go to kindergarten without that. But then you see the teachers then they're being graded on how well their students do.
Yeah.
And then that's a deterrent to having a child with learning needs. I mean, it just seems, impossible almost. There's just, because as I sit here and listen to us talk, I think teachers, we're making them into these, it sounds like they're kind of evil people, and yet, like you said, they're kind and loving, and they're caught between a rock and a hard place.
It's the system, and I think that's, and just an example, and then this goes to the budget question Matt was asking. Again, you're a teacher, you've got 25 kids in your class.
Or 35.
Or 35, and there's no system in place, and the child needs help, so you say, the only place I can get help is special ed,
Right.
because they get double weighting if you're on special ed.
Exactly.
Whereas when you go to RTI, you do things like take it first, second, third, where we have biggest impact. You take all the teachers in first, second, and third, you take all of the aides, and they get instruction in a full group, but then they walk to the group that's on their level. Now you've got an intervention the next day. I see the child's behind. I know they don't know some of their phonics that they need, so they walk to a group that there's a place for the teacher to send them. So this is not about teachers. I mean, teachers, this is about the system never supporting teachers. And so then what teachers say is, well, if we get you on an IEP, you'll get a lot of protection. You know, if I just go as a teacher and say, this student needs another dose of reading, but there was no system. But if I got them on an IEP, and then it becomes very legal, and the IEP says you have to do it, then all of a sudden you've got an aide in the room to give you this, or, so the system, it's a systems problem.
Right, I mean, it's sort of like the example I shared before. I've yet to meet a teacher who thinks we have no talented and gifted Native Americans in our entire community, or that 25% of our students are developmentally delayed. But that is what the system has manifested.
And they're in a huge system, and they're just trying to do the best things they can by 35 kids or whatever,
So just a process check. I think what we should, so I just want to make sure that OEIB actually has the resources and the staff to do the focus groups before we ask them to do that. Does that seem like a fair ask that's doable?
Well, it's either something that we could do or subcontract out. I think we can do a lot of the research. It's possible we'd subcontract out or find a partner to do the focus groups with.
Okay. And then does it make sense for us to, at our next meeting, really focus on the parent, family, and community kind of partnership policy while we give OEIB team members the time to actually kind of subcontract out, get the focus group information, get the research, and then kind of have that be sort of secondary so that you have the space to actually do the work you need to do to...
Yeah.
Does that sound like a good...
I think what's helpful for us is to process all that we've been given today and then be able to give back a coherent sense of timeline. When would we hit certain deliverables on this? I think the special ed one, I think that you mentioned, Ramon, is a longer process that needs to be done. I mean, not that both need to be done carefully, but this is more complex, has to be done a little bit more slowly, so.
Perfect. Great. So in the interest of time, I want...
Nicole, if I could just one last comment. I think Janet and Nancy did a nice job at the end there, actually elaborating on on the earlier point I was trying to make, which is that I think there will be some, I mean, myself included, as not being an educator, that say, boy, you know, they're providing resources to these kids. I mean, what's the problem? And so a clear problem
Right.
statement around what the implications are. And then I think to Nancy's point would be, you know, to a more precise diagnosis and more a more precise and helpful diagnosis would hopefully free up resources. I mean, right now they're throwing resources at this problem. Well, what would
Better system.
what would a system do to redirect those resources to more effectively serve these kids? I think that's kind of the constructive framing of this.
And I think,
Just a personal experience with that, and if you, like you said, you get double weighted if you have more kids in special education. If you put fewer in, you get less money. When I was doing my different grants, if we didn't spend all the money, then nobody said, "Good job, Janet, take
Right.
everybody to lunch." It was, "Well, then you don't need that much money,
Yeah.
so you can do it.
Need less.
We'll take money away from
And
you."
you couldn't carry it over or anything?
No. I mean, so if there was a way to reward efficiency and effectiveness, because like you said, we all go, I mean, I would in May literally start looking at what can we purchase so that we don't have to give this money to some other community that wasn't managing the funds. Or we got lucky and didn't have kids with such severe disabilities that needed one-to-one nursing in a particular year. And the next year we could have 4. So
Right.
the funding
This
is,
is exactly what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
Again, from a non-educator's perspective, I mean, what immediately comes to mind is maybe the heavy weightings are appropriate, but not with that designation. Maybe it's the weightings more in early learning or somewhere else where it's much more, the diagnosis is much more precise.
well, and to your piece about the problem statement, there is a big problem in that I think folks and teachers are being very genuine when they're saying, let's really make sure you get this help and the support. But we know that once a kid is on an IEP and has that label, their chances of success,
Stigmatized,
it's pretty overwhelming to see their overall outcomes. I
It's
think,
very stereotyped very quickly.
yeah, and so the price that we all pay as a state of just students not being successful is pretty profound. So we do need to articulate that because I think you're exactly right. I am gonna move us on to the next topic. But those last 2 subjects, I just want to commend our committee. That was a
That's super
really
stuff,
meaningful conversation.
Thank you.
And these are not easy tasks we're choosing, but they're the right tasks. So thank you. Peter, would you talk to us a little bit about the upcoming committee that we're going to be combining with outcomes and investment? And what
and I'll keep it super short, and folks can follow up with me between now and the next meeting. The August 6th equity meeting, which is in this room, 8:30 to 10:30, is different than usual because it will have the outcomes and investments subcommittee members joining us at the table. Outcomes and Investments has been hearing presentations. They're going to hear a few more in July, end of July, from different agencies and different groups on where we should be investing money. And the format for their presentations are identical. What they've been doing is identical to the format that I shared today for ours. And I've attended all of those meetings. We've heard all kinds of different presentations. Some are very, very specific in terms of how much is going to be spent, what's the perverse incentive that the agency wants to take care of. Others are a little bit more amorphous, a little bit more general. And as a committee, we're starting to think about how do we compare and contrast them. And on August 6th, the goal is that we look at these investments and strategies and compare and contrast them not only in terms of the money, the intended effect, the expected return on investment, but also in particular with regard to the equity lens. And the equity lens document that all of you are familiar with has in the first appendix to it a set of, I think it's 9 questions that we should ask anytime we do an investment. So my recommendation, and I gave this tool out to you at the last meeting, we didn't actually go over it in any detail, but I did show it on the slide. It's a very simple document, it just takes those questions and puts it into a form with boxes so you can take notes. But my recommendation is that we use either all of those 9 questions or a critical subset of those and use that for our process and go through each one and ask the question each way through. That's the only way I see that we can rigorously examine these. And the answers to some of them might be don't know, need to get more feedback from the HEC, need to get more from early learning, or it might be in their statement, they've answered it. And we can say, okay, they nailed it right here. And that allows us to enter into a sort of a delayed dialogue with the original presenter about whether or not they've hit a certain mark. So that's my suggestion as to at least an organizing frame, because that 2 hours is going to fly by. Mm-hmm. In order to hear those investments, it's taken us about 8 hours. So the notion that we're going to get through them without a heavy-duty facilitated discussion, I think is foolish. We'll just get lost in the first one. So there's got to be a way to move through it.
Are you volunteering to do the heavy-duty facilitation?
Yes.
Okay.
And what I'm volunteering to do is to take, after the July 24th meeting, when we have all the investments in, and I've started this with Whitney. I wish Whitney could be here because she's really done a lot of the thinking on this as well, and Danny Ledesma in the Governor's office, to list out the investments with some categories that include some of the equity lens categories, so that before the meeting you've got that information ahead of time. It'll be about 2 weeks before the meeting. Not ideal, but at least enough time that you can look at it. So that's my proposal, and I think it'll be exciting. Like Nancy said before, it's the first time we've ever done this process, but it feels very, very rich. I have nothing to compare it to, but it feels really, really rich. So.
Great. Any questions or support folks will need to?
You emailed that, the little things with boxes.
You may do it again? I did, yeah.
I think I probably have it, but if you could again,
okay,
that would be helpful to me.
And I'll populate it with the name of the investment. So it'll be like you can just sit there and take notes on it as you look over it. And
I would just invite whomever's on the phone to mute themselves so that we can actually go into the last portion of our agenda, which is public testimony. And I will note that we have a limitation of 3 minutes, and one speaker from each group is invited to speak. And we have one person signed up, and that is Dave Porter. So we'd love to invite you to share with us, Dave.
I want to submit something.
Great.
I didn't make enough copies. I have 3 brief comments related to system transformation in education in Oregon and related to equity issues. The first is feeding on what Peter was talking about, the outcomes. I submitted that to the Outcomes and Investment Subcommittee. It relates to expanding dual language immersion programs for Spanish students in Oregon. OEIB made 6 dual language investments the last time. I would urge you to continue those. As I show there, you've got 11 districts with over 1,000 Hispanics each that have no dual language. And within those 11 districts, there are 15 schools with majority Hispanics that do not have dual language immersed Spanish programs. So there's plenty of room to improve that. Research all shows that you get better educational outcomes with dual language immersion than almost all the other forms. Point 2, there's a shortage of teachers to staff those programs. It's a system issue. It's been there for a while. It's going to get worse as we try to expand them. Higher ed's not producing them. The teacher credentialing is not bringing them through the system. It needs to be looked at systematically. It's an equity issue. The third equity issue is high school study abroad. Portland Public Schools is interested in sending high school students abroad for a year and paying for it. They've got a pilot program that they're considering that would send 3 kids to China and 3 kids to Mexico. The equity issue is, for example, in the Jefferson cluster in Portland, they're starting a Mandarin immersion program at King School, which is a predominantly African American school in an African American community. Low income. There is no way those kids will be afford to have their parents send them abroad to China after they've learned Mandarin. The existing system now is that the kids who get to study abroad are those whose parents spend it, or a few that can get some federal grants. So I urge you, this issue is in part before the Board of Education. There's a question on whether if Portland Public Schools sends a high school kid abroad, whether they can count that kid for the distribution of state school funds. I think the law is gray enough, confused enough that they could simply make a rule and say that it is, but that's the issue before them. It's an equity issue, and I bring it to you, and I urge you to support them or support it more broadly if we move ahead. Thanks.
Thank you for your really clear and concise and specific advice to us. I really appreciate that. Great. That concludes our meeting for today, unless anyone has anything to say in our few short additional minutes.
Nicole, this is Helen. I wasn't able to sign up, but I wanted to say a few comments.
We invite you to do so in less than 3 minutes.
Less than 3 minutes, I promise. One thing I really enjoy the depth to which you address the issues and are attempting to look at ways to look at equity across the board. In the policy that you talked about, one voice for GED, I think it would be good to identify maybe some higher level guidance for strategies for forming those partnerships, for integrating and coordinating the alignment between the culturally specific organizations and community colleges. In the conversation that you had about the parent engagement, I want to follow up also with Janet's comments. The reason that parent engagement works well in Head Start is because they have clearly defined mandated standards. I think it would really be beneficial to start thinking about developing equity standards for Oregon. There are some states that have done a really good job with educational equity standards, and there are some samples. And then thirdly, in terms of the formation of the focus groups, I really want to recommend that when that is accomplished or done, that we use a model, a research-based model for developing community of practices around affinity groups with very well-defined outcomes, goals, and strategies, and include a diverse membership in those groups that include professionals that are providing those private services for children referred for disabilities, because there's a big linkage and gap there. I know that I was a mental health consultant for many years, had many kids referred to me that really didn't have the level of disability, and a lot of them were Spanish speaking, of course. And so I think there's an education piece and also a systemic piece, and that's my input, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Helen. And while it is not our custom or our practice to respond to public testimony, I will note that in previous equity subcommittees, we've actually given staff the charge to pursue creating equity standards, and I don't know if that was lost between staff changes, but I think that is something that this committee has clearly asked for, recognizing that we are not, we're not the implementing body, we're not the ones who are going to do that, but that is a role that someone at ODE or the OEIB should be playing in helping institutions implement that policy, if you will. So perhaps I was under the impression that that was work in progress, but if not, we need to revisit that that work charge given from this group as part of successful implementation of that policy. So that concludes our meeting 3 minutes early.